Hello. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm going to stop and take a little hand raising. How many people in the audience are parents or family members? Raise your hand if you're a parent or a family member. Okay. How many are professionals working with individuals with autism? Raise your hand. Okay, that's great. That helps me a lot. How many school teachers in the room? Okay, thanks. I think that helps me and our other speakers today. So I want to talk this afternoon about working with families and the importance of working with families. At Teach, we really believe strongly that families are our partners in working with children and adolescents and adults with autism. So at Teach, we have a rule that families don't ever sit in the waiting room. That if we're working with a 2-year-old, the parent is there with us. If we're working with a 22-year-old, the parent is there with us. And I want to talk a little bit today about how we work with families. And I'm going to talk about 3 different topics today. Hopefully you'll see how these 3 things go together. So first I'm going to talk about the way that children and adults with autism learn and think. It's important for families to understand the learning differences that their children experience, because that will give them ideas on how to interact with their children at home. Once we know a little bit about the learning differences of autism, I think then it will make sense why we use visual supports with individuals with autism to help compensate for those learning differences. And then I want to spend some time today talking about the idea of preparing children and adolescents for the adult life. At Teach, because we've been working with individuals with autism for so many years, we've been able to see them grow up and are now working with adults in their 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond. And we have a perspective on what we wish they would have learned when they were younger in order to have a better, successful transition to adulthood. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today as well. So our intervention philosophy at Teach that stayed the same for the last 40 plus years have been these 4 things. One is the idea that I talked about earlier, which is that families are our collaborators or partners. And I can't stress enough how important that is. Yesterday, in one of the presentations in the other master class, a mom talked about how it was so important for her and other mothers and fathers to be involved in their children's intervention. That's very important. The other thing that's important is to take the whole person or big picture view. And what I mean by that is we talk with families about focusing on academics, but also focusing on other life skills. More than simply focusing on academics, it's important to focus on independent living skills. And I'll talk about some of that in a little bit today. And then the third thing that we really focus on is understanding those learning differences. And then last, using structured teaching or visual supports to help with those learning differences. So the way that I think about autism, and have for a very long time, is that the symptoms of autism, some of the behavioral challenges that you see, some of the temper tantrums that you see, or some of the social difficulties that you see, are really caused by the fact that individuals with autism often learn about the world in a very different way. That they have differences in understanding and paying attention to their environment And those differences in learning cause the autism symptoms and the behavioral challenges that we see in the children and adults that we work with. And that in order to choose an effective intervention, the treatment approach really needs to fit with how we know that children with autism learn and think. So this particular slide is a summary slide from another hour-long talk. So I won't talk in detail about all the differences that we know about learning and attention in autism, but let me highlight a few for you today. One thing we know is that individuals with autism often have trouble learning automatically or intuitively. They don't pick up on things in the world in the same way that children or adults without autism learn about their world. So one of my favorite authors who has autism is Temple Grandin. And she talks about the idea that other people seem to understand how to interact with each other almost as if they were telepathic. They seem to understand the rules of social interaction without being taught. And that's true for most of us without autism. We've learned how to interact in our lives without needing to be taught those specific rules. So for example, I once worked with a teenager about how close to stand to another person. And typically with young children, we don't have to teach them how close to stand to another person. They know what the distance is between where you are standing and where the other person is standing. But for oftentimes with our individuals with autism, they have trouble understanding something like how close that they should stand. And in fact, we often teach it very explicitly using rules because they don't pick up on those things automatically or intuitively. So, for example, with my student with autism that I worked with, I taught him how to stand next to another person and to put his arm out. So if I were here, then he would stand here. Now, that isn't the way we teach most people about how close you stand, but that's what I had to do so he would understand that sort of unwritten rule of social interaction. So in Temple Grandin's writing, she has this book called The 10 Unwritten Rules of Social Interaction, where she tries to put rules to things that most of us learn automatically or intuitively. So one thing we know then is that people with autism often have difficulty with that automatic or implicit learning. The other thing that we know about for individuals with autism is they often have difficulty with their attention. So Jerry Dawson yesterday talked about this idea, even in infants, of having sticky attention. That sticky attention is the idea that individuals with autism have maybe an over-focused attention, so that their attention is stuck and they have trouble disengaging and shifting attention. So perhaps if I had sticky attention, I might be stuck on this beautiful orange scarf in the first row, and then not see all of the rest of you in the room because my attention was stuck on that very pretty orange scarf. So that's what we see often in individuals with autism, that their attention is over-focused and they miss other things in their environment. We also know that individuals with autism have trouble with understanding another person's perspective or theory of mind. I think you might hear more about that later on this afternoon. But we know that individuals with autism oftentimes don't understand that what they're thinking is different from what another person is thinking. So if their favorite thing is dinosaurs, they might not understand that another person's favorite thing is not dinosaurs. And then the last thing we know is that individuals with autism have problems with what we call executive function, planning, organization, and time management. So it's important to think about what it must be like for a person with autism to have trouble with learning automatically, with paying attention to the right things in their environment, with understanding another person's perspective, and with planning and organization. If I had trouble in all of those areas of thinking and learning, I'm not sure that I would get out of bed in the morning. It would be very hard to understand the world around you. And perhaps you might have some temper tantrums because of how difficult it is to understand what other people are expecting from you. Now, we know from Dr. Hape's work that she presented yesterday morning that individuals with autism don't necessarily have all of these weaknesses, but some of these weaknesses, enough to make it difficult for them to learn about their world. So when we're choosing an intervention approach for working with children or adults with autism, we want to help compensate for these weaknesses by building on strengths. So for example, we know that individuals with autism may have difficulty with that automatic learning, but they're very good with rule-based learning. Parents often tell me that if they give their child a rule, they follow it every time. We also know that they're very good at focusing on details, that sometimes that over-focused attention is a good thing. So that we want to take where we think that their strengths are and help them compensate for their differences. So at Teach, we think a lot about how to change the environment to compensate for these learning differences. So in some ways, we're not really changing the child or adult with autism. We're teaching them how to cope with learning differences by changing the environment. It's really a learning disability view of autism. It's the idea that if you learn differently, then how can we change the environment to help accommodate those learning differences? From a behavioral perspective, I would say that we're an antecedent-based intervention approach. In other words, changing what happens before the behavioral challenges, changing the environment. So many of the intervention approaches that we use follow these 4 guidelines. We use explicit learning or rules to compensate for differences or difficulties in implicit or intuitive learning. We use visual cues to direct attention to what is the relevant, important information in the environment. We use visual structure to support organization, planning, and generalization. And then we use strengths and interests to increase engagement with learning. So the goals then for us by using structured teaching or a series of visual supports is to make the world more meaningful and predictable for the individual with autism. We want to use visual supports so that the person with autism can be more independent. One of the difficulties that we see both at home and in the school is that we see many individuals with autism who are prompt dependent. They don't show initiation. They aren't able to independently act in their environment. They wait for somebody to tell them what to do. And one of the things that we've seen at Teach, as we've seen children with autism grow up to be adults, is that successful adult life really requires the ability to do things on your own and not to have to wait for someone to tell you what to do. We also use structure to increase flexibility. And I'm going to give you some examples of that today. It's important to think about how to use changes in the environment to increase flexibility, not to create more rigidity. We talk a lot about the importance of generalizing skills. It's very important that when you're working with a child with autism at home or in the clinic, that you think about how to make sure that you generalize skills learned in one place to a new place. I'll give you my sort of best example of that in my own clinical life. I worked with a child in our clinic for years, for several months, teaching him how to tie his shoes. So I taught him how to tie his shoes in the clinic. This was before I was at Teach. The parent was in the waiting room. I was in the clinic room with the child. I taught him how to tie his shoes. At the end, he had his shoes tied. It was great. I met with his dad and said, "Do you have any goals for him at home?" The dad said, "I'd really like for him to tie his shoes." He had been tying his shoes independently with me for a month and had never generalized that skill to home. So one of the reasons why it's so important to work with families is to help make sure that what you do in your school or your clinic is also being done at home. Otherwise, you're teaching a skill that works in only one place and isn't really preparing that child to be successful as an adult if they can't generalize to a new place. We also think about using visual supports or structure as a way to decrease confusion or anxiety because of the learning differences. That many of the behavioral problems we see are a sign of confusion, not knowing what other people are expecting of them. So I'm just going to talk about several different strategies that we use today. Probably the one that people know the most about from a structured perspective is the use of visual schedules. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use schedules effectively at home today, and you could use the same in your clinics or at school. So a schedule is a visual cue that indicates the activities that will occur in sequence. It's a way to organize information so that the person with autism knows what to expect during their day. So there are many kinds of schedules, and I'm going to give you a couple ideas about schedules. The first rule of a schedule is the schedule needs to fit the developmental level of the person you're working with. So I'll say that again. The schedule needs to fit the developmental level of the person with autism. So this example here on the left, that example is a first-then schedule for a child who understands First, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this next thing. First, I'm going to eat lunch, and then I can play with my iPad. It's for a child who understands pictures and understands the idea of first, then. I was in a preschool classroom a couple of weeks ago where the children were using first, then schedules, but they didn't understand the idea of first you do this and then you do the next thing. So the schedule didn't work at all for them. So if a child understands the concept of first, then, this is a great schedule to use. The one on the right, the red schedule, is for a child who has slightly more skills, who might understand what those pictures mean. That first I play with blocks and cars, then I can go outside and play in the playground, and then last I can come in and have a snack. So it shows the child what to expect during the day. And for this child, they understand those words and those pictures. My next examples are written schedules. They're from a classroom. You could use the same idea, though, for home. So the one on the right is for a girl who can read. So her schedule was to play, go to morning group, work, go to the teacher table, and go outside. So it's just a written checklist. I talk a lot about the idea that most of us use schedules. I have an iPhone schedule, works great for me. But for younger children, that might not work, so you might need to use simple words or go back to the pictures. It's important when you decide to use a schedule that you choose meaningful pictures. I chose to show you this picture because I was in a different country recently where I did not understand the language. So I was using the pictures to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. I had no idea what this picture was supposed to be telling me to do. I thought perhaps it meant no pointing in this country. It actually means no dropping garbage, no littering. It's a good example of when you choose a picture to make sure you choose a picture that the child will understand. If the child does not understand the picture, but you understand the picture, it's not going to help the child with their learning differences. The idea of using schedules is to use visual supports to help the child understand a world that is confusing for them. If your pictures are confusing, it's not a very good support for the child or adult. This next one is not a schedule, but I wanted to show this again as an example of the importance of choosing good quality pictures. This is a communication system, and if you look at the top left here, where those symbols mean I want. Why do those symbols mean I want? It doesn't look like anything that I would understand to mean I want. So again, when you're choosing pictures, they have to be meaningful for the child. Oftentimes we say that you need to use real pictures like these ones. These are real pictures on a refrigerator for a child. They were trying a system like this for that child. The child continued to have behavior problems, couldn't communicate. We switched to pictures like this the child could understand, and we saw a decrease in behavior problems. The reason you use schedules and visual supports is to help the learning differences, so the pictures have to be meaningful. Because every person with autism has a different developmental level, every person with autism might need a slightly different schedule. When I go into a school and see that every child has the same exact schedule, it's a sign that it's probably not individualized to the developmental level of the child. Some child might need this kind of schedule. Some child might need one of these kinds of schedule. So when I go into a school setting or a clinic setting, I hope I see many different kinds of schedules. They should fit the developmental level of the person. The other thing we know about using visual supports or schedules is it's important to change them often. The reason that we use visual supports is to help the person with autism understand their environment so that they're not having as many behavior problems and they're not rigid. If you use the same schedule every day, you're helping the child be more rigid. So we want to use the schedules as a way to teach comfort with change. So here's an example where on the schedule was swimming, and we put a big X, no swimming today, and instead you're going to go roller skating. And I tell parents that they should practice changing the schedule to something that the child really likes to do. Don't change to something the child doesn't like to do when you're trying to teach that change is good. If you want to help with more flexibility, teach the child to understand the idea of change to something that's good. So in this case, this is a child who hates swimming, but likes roller skating. So we're teaching the idea of changing the schedule to something that's good. And then once they understand the idea of change, you can start changing to things that might be not quite as good. You can use schedules in the community to help a child with autism be able to go new places. This is an example of a schedule in our local museum in Chapel Hill, where the child first goes, so you can see the middle is a map, and then the boxes are where you go first, second, third, and fourth. And the idea is that you first go to the splash or water area, the garden, the forest, and then the bus. So it's a really nice visual image for the child of what they're going to do during their visit to the community museum. This is another more simple schedule for taking a child to the grocery store. These are the things that we're going to buy. We're going to buy some cereal, some bananas, and some milk today. One of the things I talked about earlier is this idea of using visual supports to increase independence so that children with autism are not as prompt dependent. And this is a support we use to teach showering skills and independent skills in the bathroom. So this is an example where the child, as they wash their hair, they put the hair on the puzzle. As they wash their arms, they put their arm on the puzzle. When the puzzle's done, they have finished washing their body. So it teaches the sequence of washing and independently being able to go through the different steps and not needing mom to stand and prompt through all the different steps of washing. We can also sometimes use visual supports for turn taking. So this is two boys who are taking turns playing basketball, and they each check off when they take a turn. I don't know if you can read it, but it says Shaquille takes a check, Ernest takes a turn, they each take 3 turns, they high five, they go check their schedule. So they're playing basketball independently without somebody needing to be there telling them what to do. As we think about using visual supports with children, we've really expanded the way we think about visual supports down to young children and then up to adults. I'm really going to focus a little bit more on transition to adulthood, but I'll just talk briefly about the other end of the lifespan with young children. I would not ever use a sequenced series of pictures with very young children, because it's not developmentally appropriate for 2-year-olds to have a sequence of pictures that you pull off the wall like the other schedules that I showed you, because 2-year-olds won't understand those pictures. So with 2-year-olds, we might use something like this transition object, this cup, and instead of a picture schedule, we might give them an object to show them where they're going next. So it's a transition object, it's not a schedule with pictures. I was recently in a classroom for toddlers where all of the 18 to 24-month-old toddlers had picture schedules on the wall. I wouldn't use those with toddlers because it's not developmentally appropriate. I would use visual supports so that the toddler understands where they're going. I would use real objects, and I would use those as helping the child transition from one place to the next. Over on the right side, we have pictures of visual routines we might use. So for example, the one below is a routine for dressing. First, actually it's a routine for going to bed. First you put on your underwear, your pajama pants, your pajama shirt, and you read your book before bed. So it's a sequence like a schedule of pictures, but instead of using picture schedules, we're using real objects to show the child what to expect. And this is the work of Lauren Turner Brown and Kara Hume at North Carolina and their program, which is called Family Implemented Teach for Toddlers. And I just have one of their data slides that they let me use today, just to show you that in their work with families, they found that showing families how to use these very simple visual supports reduced the level of stress that parents were experiencing and working with their toddlers at home. So the red line is the toddlers, the parents who did not get our intervention, they just got other interventions in the community. So SAU is services as usual. And the blue line is the Family Implemented Teach for Toddlers. And you can see that parents are reporting less stress with learning how to use these simple visual supports at home. But I stress simple supports, real objects. Okay, so where I want to spend the rest of my time today is thinking about how we can use these visual supports and other ideas to help focus on this transition to adulthood. And I think you're going to hear a little bit later from Mark about some of our research on adult outcomes, which is really dismaying given how much effort and time we put into young children and adolescents. And then when they leave school and go to adulthood are struggling so much with being successful and having a good quality of life. So we've taken some of our programs for adults and worked backwards to say, what should we do with teenagers to better prepare them for adulthood? So the program that we have that we're using right now is called the T-STEP, or Teach School Transition to Employment and Post-Secondary Education. This is a program that we have some grant funding to look at the effectiveness of, but we're right in the middle of running the project, and I don't have any research data to show you. And it's important, really important, to have evidence that this works. I'm going to talk about it today, but I just have to say I don't have the data to show you yet. So this is a program that we designed for students, adolescents between the ages of 5 and 18 years of age, 15 and 18, not 5, 15 and 18, so teenagers. And in the United States, this is the age where they are in our high school settings before they leave school. So this is the last 3 years that they are in school before they transition to adulthood. And we had a choice to say which of the students would we work with, which of the teens would we develop a program around. What we would do with teenagers who are in the special education programs versus what we would do with students who are in inclusion or the regular education programs. those two sets of students need very different kinds of supports. This program was developed for the students who are in the inclusion or regular education classrooms. And I say that because when you see some of our examples, these are not what we would do for teenagers who have intellectual disability along with their autism. This is a program for students who have intellectual skills that are average or higher, who are in the regular education classroom. The reason why we picked this particular group of students to work with is that in the United States, in the last 3 years of school, the focus is very much on academics. It's very much on learning the math and writing and academic skills, and not focused very much on vocational skills or college preparation skills. And what that means is that we have students who in the United States will finish high school, get their regular education diploma, but not be successful at the university and not be successful with employment, because they really haven't been taught the skills to help them be successful for the next step in their lives. An example of that I'll give you from my own work is I had a family that we were working with in the clinic for years on academic skills, on social skills, on communication skills. He got the same high school diploma as all the other students at his school. And the day after he graduated, his mother came to me and said, "Do you think that we could teach him how to shower independently?" He absolutely should have been able to shower independently if he could take physics and calculus in school. But the focus of for our teenagers who are in the inclusion classroom has been straight academics and not on other life skills necessary for success as an adult. So the idea then for our program is really thinking about what are the life skills that you need to be successful either in a college setting or a employment setting. I'll give you another example of a college student that I worked with. He came to the university. He was so smart, he got the scholarship to come to the university free for his family. He was going into engineering, but he didn't know how to make purchases on his own. He didn't know how to greet other people, but he had good academic skills. So when we think about the skills necessary for successful adult life, really think about 3 different areas. One is the learning styles that we talked about earlier. That's why I spent time earlier talking with you about them. I think that adults with autism have some of the same learning difficulties that younger individuals with autism have, but they apply to different settings. So we see that adults with autism need very specific and detailed job expectations because of their preference for explicit rule learning rather than automatic learning. We see that often, because of their attention difficulties, they miss the most important information in the university classroom or on the job. And we see, because of the executive function difficulties, that they're not organized at work and they're not organized at school, and that these difficulties in learning often create problems for success in an adult life. We also see that problems with theory of mind create difficulties either at work or difficulties at the university. In fact, some of these social skills difficulties are the reasons why students don't aren't successful in college or at work. I'll give you an example of a college student that I worked with who was in a biology class. This was one of his favorite topics. He knew as much about biology as the professor. So he would correct her during lecture when she said something that wasn't quite right. So the professor actually loved him. She'd never had a student who was so smart. The other students in class laughed at him and made fun of him. He didn't understand what he was doing wrong. He stopped going to class. He failed the class. He knew more than the professor. So here's an example where his social understanding of appropriate behavior in a university setting caused failure, despite the fact that he knew more than the professor about the topic. And then the last thing, especially as individuals with autism age, and you heard a little bit about this yesterday from Dr. Habe, is that we see this comorbid anxiety or difficulty with emotion regulation that makes it difficult to be successful in the work or school setting. So this intervention that we have focuses on 3 different areas. The first area is organization or executive function. So we actually teach the students how to organize themselves, how to take a task and figure out the best way to organize it. We teach them time management and flexibility, which is really just a fancy way of saying we teach them to create their own schedules. And we focus on some daily living skills. This particular part, focusing on the daily living skills, really takes the parent. I cannot teach shower skills in the clinic. I just can't do it. I need the parent to be the co-therapist working with me on showering skills. The second area is social skills or self-advocacy skills. This is not a social skills intervention at all. It's not about friendships. It's about what are the social skills that you need to be successful at work or the university. I talk about it a lot. If you think about where you work, sometimes where you work, you don't have friends. You have coworkers. And you need to be polite to your coworkers, but they're not necessarily your very best friends. So this is not a friendship intervention. It's really about how to use appropriate social skills, we call them social niceties, and how to ask for help. And then the third area is emotion regulation. We talk about how to cope with stress at work, at the university, and how to take feedback when somebody corrects you. Probably one of the easiest ways to get fired from a job is to get mad when your employer corrects your job performance. So I'll just give you some examples of the interventions, techniques that we use in each of these areas. So for organization, we talk with our students about the importance of not having their parents or teachers remind them what to do every step of the way, that it's their job to organize themselves. It's their job to create visual reminders. I tell parents of these teenagers, he should make his own schedule. For young children, parents and teachers should make the schedule. For these teenagers, the students, the children, or the teenagers rather, young adults, they need to make their own schedules if they're going to be successful and independent in life. So we talk with our teenagers about using visual reminders to help you learn more quickly, to help you be more independent, to have better time management, And then we also teach self-monitoring skills. So very much in the same ideas of why we would use visual supports for young students, we teach these adolescents about the importance of using visual supports and routines, and we teach them how to do it appropriately. So with schedules or to-do lists, we really talk with students about using the schedule or to-do list that works best with them. When I first worked with college students or university students with autism, I had a group of university students with autism that I supported. And when I first started working with them, I thought that what we'll do is we'll create everybody an electronic calendar that they could go onto their phone or their computer and they could use a schedule, but it would be electronic because I thought that would be what university students wanted to use. Okay? It didn't work. Exactly the same thing for young children when I said everybody should have their own schedule that fits their own personal style. The same thing for teenagers and young adults. Some of my teenagers love the electronic schedule. Some of my college students, university students, hate the electronic schedule. They can't get their phone to work. They don't know how to check the schedule. They want just a regular old paper and pencil schedule. So it's important to choose the technology that's a good fit. We teach them how to choose the technology. We teach them how to use it, how to check it off. We talk to them about when during the day should you check your schedule. If you have a schedule of everything you're supposed to do during the day and you never check it, you still won't be successful. You have to check your schedule. We also talk to our teenagers about creating organizational systems. So here's a great picture of a very messy bedroom. And we talk to mom and dad and teenager and say, how would you fix this? Can you think of a way to organize this room? And what would be a good choice system for you? And again, it really needs to be the teenager system, not mom or dad's system, because otherwise mom can clean the room, but not the teenager. In the United States, oftentimes first jobs are around cleaning. First jobs are not usually the job that you want to end up with for the rest of your life. Many of our young teenagers in school end up with jobs that involve working, say, at Burger King, cleaning tables, or at Starbucks, washing dishes. Those are oftentimes what our teenagers have as first jobs. And so we teach them, how would you go about organizing your first job? What would be a sequence that you would use? So we might say, if you're going to do cleaning, if you're covering a shelf area, you need to start at the top and go from left to right, just like when you read. That you need to develop a routine that you can use for this kind of job. And we teach students to think about routines. Give you a great example. I had a high school student recently who came in, such a smart young man. And his mom said he had a first job that was involving sweeping the floor. And he couldn't keep the job because he was terrible at sweeping the floor because he didn't have any organizational system. He would just randomly sweep in different places in the room. Okay? Well, we can fix that. He needs an organizational approach to sweeping the floor. So we talk a lot about organization in this program. We talk a lot about organization in the community and how we see organization everywhere. And we encourage our teenagers and families to think about developing organization systems at home. For daily living skills or independent living skills, this is the list I give to every family before their teenager goes off to the university. These are the things that students need to do in the United States before they go to the university. If they can't do these things independently, they're not going to be very successful at the university. They need to use a cell phone. More than just using a cell phone, they need to learn how to listen to their messages and erase old messages. They need to use a planner. They need to get out of bed in the morning on their own. They need to be able to use a washing machine and dryer. And they need to be able to take their medications independently. And these are skills that are very difficult for all college students to learn to do independently. When my daughter went off to the university, she struggled with learning some of these things. Now she's in her second year at the university. She can do all of these things independently. So most students without autism might struggle in learning these things. But our students with autism learn differently. You really need to sit down and teach them very carefully how to do all of these things independently. So they have to go to the university classes. They have to get themselves up in the morning. If they have a job and they're living independently, they have to get themselves up and out to the job. If you don't show up on time, you're going to fail your class or get fired from your job. You have to be able to learn to take your medications. Many university students, when they go off to the university, they have never taken their medications independently. They stop taking their anxiety medications or their ADHD medications, and that is not a good outcome for university classes if you stop taking your medications. For all of the things that we teach the students in this program, we start with a self-assessment. So this is an example of our self-assessment around social niceties. And we tell them to rate themselves from a scale of 1 to 5 on these different skills. So the first one says, I am often reminded by others to use pleasantries such as please and thank you. Is that very true or almost never happens to you? The second one says, even though I might not mean to, I interrupt others when they are talking. Is that very frequent or almost never? So we've created a self-assessment for every skill that we teach. I'm just showing you one of them, but this is the one that we use for social niceties. And then we say to them, this is what those scores mean. So if you score 20 plus on this self-assessment, it means that your behavior and feelings indicate that you may discourage others from wanting to be around you and help you. And then we say, is that what you want? It's really important for teenagers and young adults to help them create their own plans and goals. If the teenager says, I don't care, then it won't work very well for them to work on these skills. They have to want to care and understand why these skills would be important. This is one of our examples of teaching social niceties. Again, it's not a social skills intervention. It's just some very specific things that you might do at the university or at work. So you might greet others when you enter a room. You might give a compliment, and you might say goodbye. So just what we call social niceties, not a lot of social skills. And we say if you do these things every time you work or go to class, you will be more well-liked by the people around you. And then the last area is emotion regulation, and we talk just a lot about emotion regulation with our teenagers. And we use, this is just a social story that we use, why it's important to listen to feedback, even if it upsets you. So this story talks about sometimes people do not like being told that they need to change the way they're doing something. But you need to realize that when your teacher or parent or boss gives you advice, it's because they believe you can make the change and improve your schoolwork or your job. We talk with our teenagers about the idea of stress and coping, that we know that sometimes on the bottom, that on the top, if you have more stress and not a lot of coping skills, that you're going to be balanced toward feeling stress and not being able to handle it, and that you need to balance it the other way by having more coping skills. So the coping skills that we have here listed are things like relaxing, taking a deep breath, or listening to music. We use some of the techniques that are part of Judy Reven's Face Your Fears program. This program is for 8 to 14-year-olds with autism, but we've used some of the same techniques from this program in our teen program, in our T-STEP program. And particularly, we teach our teenagers how to self-monitor their anxiety. We teach parents how to help their teens learn to do this. So we have parents say to their teenagers, can you rate how anxious you feel? Are you a 1 or a 2 in the green or okay area? Are you in the yellow area where you're starting to get a little anxious, or are you in the red area where you're very, very anxious? And we have parents work with their teens on where are you in your anxiety, and then what do you do if you rate yourself a red or a yellow? So we teach our teenagers to develop their own calming routine. With young children, we usually develop the calming routine for them. With teenagers in this T-STEP program, they create their own calming routine. So this is the theme. With teenagers, they create their own schedules. They create their own organization systems. They create their own calming routines with support. So we say to create your own routine, choose 4 things. Choose a distracting technique. What's a good distracting technique for you? Okay? And it might be something like listening to music, but maybe they don't like listening to music. So it might be going for a walk. What's a good distracting technique? Choose a breathing technique, choose a positive thoughts technique, and choose a way to tense and release energy. So we have them choose a calming routine that fits with what they like to do. And then really importantly, choose something that you can do in the university or that you can do at work. So for example, if you think it's very relaxing to scream out loud, that is not an appropriate relaxing technique to use at work. So you have to choose something that's appropriate to do at work. And then we also teach the idea of using mantras or self-instructions. This one over here on the top right is one that we did with a teenager who was very upset by crying babies. He got very, very upset when he was out in public and heard babies crying. This is a problem because we hear babies crying in public all the time. And we taught him to say, mothers take care of their crying babies. So he and his mom would go out in public, he would hear a baby crying, and his mom would help him remember to say it, and then over time he would just say, mothers take care of crying babies. So just something that he could say as part of his routine to calm himself down when he heard something like a crying baby. Okay, so in this intervention program, in our T-STEP program, what we're really hoping to do is to see that by using this program, we'll see more coping skills, more appropriate social skills in the job or university setting, and more appropriate organization skills. This program would not be successful if families didn't have a way to practice these skills outside of the clinic. So every teenager in this program has some type of place where they go to practice the skills. So they might go volunteer at the library in town. They might volunteer at a community service agency in town. but we help families to find a place where their teenager can go volunteer to practice these organization skills, to practice these skills for appropriate work-related social skills, and to practice emotion regulation skills. So just like I talked about earlier about the importance of generalization, this intervention with a parent and a teen in the clinic absolutely will not work if we don't have the families out practicing in the community and finding a place to have a volunteer job in the community. And we're hoping that what we'll see is differences in job-related skills. So to evaluate the program, we've created several different employment settings where we look at each of these skills for our students before they start the intervention and after they finish the intervention. And right now we're right in the middle of the intervention, so I can't tell you what it's going to look like. So in conclusion, I'm hoping today that I've given you some ideas about structured teaching, about how to use structured teaching across the lifespan, and that it's important to use the appropriate supports to fit the developmental level of the person, whether they're a toddler, a teenager, or an adult. And I'll thank you very much.